Ora, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Alps webinar in conjunction with the 4 regional consortia in Wales. We're going to be looking at how to use Alps Connect at Key Stage 5 this year to best effect, following the very significant changes that have happened in terms of priorities for students during lockdown and now as you welcome the young people back to full-time education. I'm going to take you through some slides, and I'm also, of course, going to spend a lot of time demonstrating in Connect. And for those of you who were with us yesterday, I really hope everything goes swimmingly for you today, as I feel it will. So without any further ado, a reminder that this recording is going to be made available not just to the schools who were at the webinar on the 8th of September, but also any schools and colleges that were not able to for a whole host of reasons. Everybody will be able to access this. I'm not going to read through today's program. This is really here as a simple reminder for you the many things that are going to get covered today, and as I'll be talking about each of them individually, it would be somewhat time wasting really to go through them at the start. But there's a fairly broad menu that we're going to deal with today, and we're hoping that lots of it will prove very useful to you in the year ahead. I'm going to begin, however, with a little look at the context in 2020. I suspect that all of you probably do know most of what I'm about to say in the next 5 minutes or so, but I think it will help set a baseline for what we're going to be thinking about in the remainder of this recording. So I'm going to start with the higher GCSE results, which thankfully were not victims to the algorithm as the A-level results had been the previous week. And what a palaver that was. Some of you must have had alarm bells ringing on the day before results release when you first saw them. I know that some schools I work with confidentially rang me to say without giving any details, we're looking at 52% of our grades having been downgraded, 60% of our grades being downgraded, and I suspect that that happened to some of you. Well, fortunately, despite Mr. Johnson saying how good and dependable and robust the results were on the day, by the 17th, of course, the tune had changed considerably and the algorithm had been binned, except for the small number of results that were higher than the CAGs. And of course, both at A-level and GCSE, they ended up being awarded. But essentially, the GCSE results and of course the A-level results were essentially your centre assessed grades, your CAGs. And they did have the impact that, to be honest, it's obvious that both Ofqual and Qualification Wales in England and Wales were trying to avoid. You can see the fairly steep rise in A star to A grades at GCSE this year to 26%, let's call it, and at A star to C to 75%, whereas the low 60s had been the norm certainly for the last 3 years. And it's pretty likely, therefore, that thinking about current year 12 or just starting with you, that you've probably got more of them and maybe a wider range of learners in terms of ability, potentially studying level 3 qualifications with you in the next 2 years. Another impact, particularly of the 25.9% A star to A grades, is you're also more likely to have young people who've got the qualifications required, even where there's a higher subject-specific tariff imposed in terms of a course requirement. And I've listed maths and the 3 sciences because in many schools, they would be the most typical subjects to perhaps have a significantly higher entry requirement to study. So they may too be thinking, A, we've got more and perhaps a wider range of learners than we have had in the past. I'm going to switch now, however, to AS results because they were impacted by the algorithm, and you can see that in the 2020 published line, which gives you a fair idea that actually if the algorithm had had its evil way, the results in 2020 would have been pretty similar to the results in 2019, up by a couple of percent, as was given to us a few weeks before results day, but nothing like the almost 10% rise in A grades compared to 2019 and the 8.4% rise in A to E grades compared to 2019. And it's that latter that I'm going to focus on for a moment, because the potential is, of course, that you've got far more people in your sixth form who have this year converted from end of year 12 and AS results into your A-level courses in year 13. The 90% A to E rate, rather, did have the impact most years in Wales and in England, when we still had the ASs, of around about 20% dropout from schools of students who'd got some U's and E's and really decided actually continuing to study to A-level was not for them. That's unlikely to be the case in September 2020. A couple of other points before leaving the context. I am going to talk about this for a minute because it interests me, and I'm sure it's interesting you. What is the right thing to do here? You've been told that students have got a choice, essentially. They can either next summer just sit the A2 units, or alternatively, they can sit both the AS and the A2 units, and the best result from either option will be awarded. So if they did better in the A2 units, that will be awarded. If they did better, if you include the ASs they also sat, that will be their final outcome. And you've all seen that graphic because it was out a long time before the summer from Qualification Wales. It explains it very, very neatly, but it does leave you with the two questions in white towards the top of the screen that I've put up there. Are you thinking of imposing one decision for all subjects, or might it be easier in some subjects to do AS and A2 than it would in others? And I'm thinking here as a history teacher, where I think it would have been pretty difficult because actually the topics for AS were not the same topics as for A2. That would have ruled that option for me, to be honest, out almost immediately. However, I'm not so sure about some of the MFLs, the modern foreign languages, and possibly maths, whether that's the same decision there. I'd be really interested to know later in the year when we meet, I hope, exactly what you've chosen to do in this regard. And finally, we don't know much, do we, about next summer? We don't even know whether the exams are going to be in May, June, or they're going to be put back. There's even been murmurings in England whether the exams ought to be replaced by centre-assessed grades again, although I gather the government are very against that as a solution, having been burnt so badly this summer. But the WJEC and Qualification Wales have been trying to say these are some of the things that we might do to make assessment more manageable in the year ahead. And indeed, they've done that at subject-specific level when they did the consultation just before the end of the summer term. But I still think maybe too much of this is up in the air for you to have an absolute certainty about what you're facing for the young people at the end of this academic year, whether that's GCSE, AS or A-level for that matter. So there's the context, and I'm now going to move to some implications for you and your students. And some of them are fairly obvious, some of them I've probably hinted at already. But I'm going to talk about course recruitment and induction first, because actually that's essentially what you've either just done, the course recruitment, or you're still doing the induction. And I'm going to labour a point here that a common feature of less effective sixth forms is a poor match between the curriculum and what students' abilities are. And to be honest, I saw that both in my lengthy teaching career, but I see it lots again over England and Wales and indeed Northern Ireland, where sixth forms have got perhaps a highly academic curriculum, but they're trying to be inclusive in terms of who comes into the school and inclusive in terms of course choice. And sometimes that works brilliantly if you've got the right teachers, but sometimes, as I'm sure many of you will also echo, it can be a bit of a disaster. And I think never more so than this year, taking my second bullet point there, it is so crucial that we try to make sure in September that they're not starting out on pathways that they're likely to fail, and perfectly, they are on pathways where they're most likely to flourish over the next 2 years. And my point below about running a structured induction period, I'm guessing actually this is something most of you do every single year before the census. But I do recommend, if you don't, include some fair course suitability assessments towards the end of the month, giving students a fair attempt to show that actually this course looks like it might be the right course for them. I've put more of this actually in a briefing paper that's mentioned at the bottom of the screen, and that will be made available for you as well as this PowerPoint and the recording. I'm going to switch now to the other thing that's going on, I suspect, in all your schools at the moment, the setting of the minimum expected grades, and then moving on from that perhaps to personalised targets. And I'm not going to labour the point at the top because I can't imagine there's any of you who now do not realise exactly how we set the minimum expected grades. They are aspirational. They are based on the top 25% of students with similar prior attainment. And they're called MEGs because they're not meant to be ceilings. If we call them targets, then in some people's heads, they become the best they might achieve. And clearly, your reports, your Connect Interactive in every single school in Wales will show students in the student performance overview with red lozenges who, in many cases, not just matched their MEG, they've beaten it. This happens in all schools all the time. Of course, it doesn't happen for all students in all schools all the time, but the point is that setting the MEG is only half the job. And that's why, looking at my bottom point, many aspirational schools and colleges in Wales are setting additional challenge as personalised targets and are uploading those into Connect. And I'm going to show you all this in a moment or two. I also think it's worth harking back to the fact that some young people in your sixth form have probably got a higher average GCSE score that may have placed them in a higher Alps band based on the results that essentially were your CAGs than they would have achieved if they'd sat all their exams. Not because they'd have done the exams badly necessarily, but they would have had their results standardized down, as happened every year because of comparable outcomes, to keep the percentages of A star to A grades, A star to B grades, etc., largely similar annually. Now, I think this is a great opportunity for you because you've got young people who've essentially been awarded the grades your teachers thought were the most likely ones they would achieve. They must, I think, be coming back to you, nervous, of course, because of lockdown, nervous perhaps because of, significant difficulties that their families have faced through lockdown as well, but perhaps overridingly very confident because they've got a nice set of Key Stage 4 results behind them. And I think with the right support and guidance, it's essential you now challenge them to do the same and hit the heights on their level 3 courses, encouraging them to aspire, to believe, and most importantly, to achieve. And I know that's a challenge, and I know that with a wider cohort in your sixth form, some of you may be apprehensive, and we're very keen at Alps that as many of you as possible do upload your year 12 cohorts and do set the MEGs as soon as possible so that our analysts can look at the average GCSE scores across Wales in 2020, starting A levels and BTECs, in comparison to what the state of play was in 2019. Not going to start saying what we may or may not do with that information right now, but I'm sure you can see it's quite a powerful thing for us to be able to come to some conclusions about to what extent the average GCSE score, not in necessarily just in your school, but over the piece, what has happened. So please, a plea from me, if you haven't done that yet, crack on with it when you've got a moment. You've probably all heard of the Alps Champions programme. We're running that again this year. There'll be much more about that going forwards. We're hoping many of you in your schools and colleges will regard yourself as the Alps champion, as the person who is absolutely going to drive Alps to the heart of the culture of your school or college. And in our Alps Champion programme, we have been very much pushing personalised student targets. Now, they can be done for a whole host of reasons, and I've listed a few at the bottom there. And clearly, one of them might simply be, and we'll look at that in a moment when I go into Connect, are the MEGs going to make sure, if you achieve those MEGs, that you'll be red hot next summer? And if not, of course, well, what might you need to do to enhance and increase the challenge to give you a fighting chance of making sure, if you get those personalised targets, you will be in the red? However, I think my bottom bullet point is actually really crucial here, because in my mind, every young person in the perfect school would have a subject target challenging him or her to achieve the very best grade they possibly could if they achieved their full potential. And I personally don't think that data alone can do that. You know your young people, you know their attitude, their perseverance, their resilience. You know much more about them than their average GCSE score. And sometimes, of course, the average GCSE score is setting in a specific subject a MEG that is in no shape or form likely to be the best grade that that young person might possibly achieve. Before going to Connect, I'm going to talk about AS and A Level MEGs for a moment, because this very much features in the Connect demonstration. If you didn't know, and we really hope you all did, the AS MEGs are lower in all bar one band than the A Level MEGs. Now, this is not because we suddenly think it gets easier at A Level, and therefore they ought to do better. It's because, for one thing, the cohort taking AS, on which the 75th percentile are based, is not the same as the A-level cohort. Go back to what I said a few minutes ago and that 20% dropout at the end of year 12, both in Wales and England. Think for a moment about the fact that the A star grade is not available at A level. Consider the fact that having taken ASs, most students who've taken 4 ASs or the equivalent drop to the equivalent of 3 courses for year 13. For all those reasons, the 75th percentile at AS is lower than it is at A level. And we have been saying for years to do what we think makes sense and make sure that sights are set at the A-level MEGs at the very beginning of the courses, even though your teachers will want to know what the AS MEGs are and to know they'll be evaluated against those. basically at the half-time score at the end of year 12. And best practice is definitely to think about having personalised targets that are no lower than the A Level MEGs. I'm referring for a second to a benchmark update for Wales that you may have already, but again, we're going to make sure that is part of your resources because it's got all of the benchmarks for each of the qualifications in Wales in a very simple, short document that's useful for you all. If you're wondering, how would my data manager access the A Level MEGs in year 12? The easiest way is to attach all year 12 to the Welsh Bac, whether they're going to study it in the end of year 13 or not. That will get them an A Level MEG. If you then download that and follow these instructions, the data manager should be fine and dandy. But of course, as ever, if a data manager hits a rock, the simplest thing to do is simply to ring or contact Alps and ask for assistance, because that will be provided by our very able customer support team. You might notice at the bottom, however, that however much you might want to set a star for your very most able as a personalised target, while they're still in year 12 and taking ASs, that would not be available to you. But of course, you will be able to as soon as the students then reach year 13. I'm now, before looking at monitoring point 0 and year 13, I'm going to end the show for a moment. I'm also going to turn my webcam off so that I disappear from view, so that we can concentrate, I hope, on Connect. And I'm first of all going to point out what I'm going to show you in Connect. I'm just going to look at the subjects here in terms of MEGs, and I've got year 12 data showing, and I've got two columns here. One is called 21, that means that's the year the kids will take their AS exams. Year 12 MUG, meaning MEG, check. I'll explain that a bit more in a moment. And then the next column, and you can probably guess all this without me saying it, that's the same young people's personalised targets tabulated as subjects. And if we just glance for a moment and scroll, you can see that there is definitely an impact. If they achieve the A Level MEGs at AS, they will add significantly more value to your AS report than if they achieve the AS MEGs. Now, what have we done to create these two columns? Firstly, some MEGs are split grade, and as a teacher, I always ignored the lower of the two grades anyway, and what we've done here is impose, if the split grades, the higher of the split grades as the MEG at AS for all students. But as you can see, some subjects that require a high score to be red hot are still not red hot. We've then applied the same process at A Level, and most subjects are now red hot and a couple are not, one of which is the Welsh Bac. Simply because there's fewer students and therefore it's an easier look, I'm going to nip into AS Art and Craft right now to show you in more detail. There's the subject page, and we can see the thermometer, and I'm going to show you a how do I and drag the thermometer from grade 4 to grade 3. And this is telling me, as that art teacher, that 5 of my 21 students need to get a higher grade, even than this, to become red hot. So I'm going to nip to my students, and I'm going to sort by prior attainment and bring those with the highest GCSE score up to the top. Now, by the time it comes to year 13, I might well be challenging some of these youngsters who are very talented in art as well as being very able across the piece to aspire to be A-star students. But for now, I'm going to look elsewhere. And if I were that art teacher, what I would be looking for is raw talent. And I believe in a growth mindset. I really do. But I also know from experience that there are young people who have much greater raw ability in some subjects than others. And I would suggest that subjects like music, art, drama, PE, these stand out in my mind, though I think the principle could be applied more widely. So I would be looking, having turned on the what if, I'd be looking either based on their GCSE result in art or indeed the talent I had seen in September/October. I'd be looking for the 5 or maybe a few more who I was confident, whilst their MEG was telling me B or C, that I could actually challenge those 5 to do better. And clearly, I wouldn't be doing it like I am just now, but you can see that a few clicks of the thumbs up, which I would then, of course, want to save. So I've got my what if saved. I might even then want to share that with my curriculum manager, but that would establish my actual personalised targets in art for me going forward. Now, having done that, I'm now going to nip back to the PowerPoint, and we're going to talk for a moment or two now. Excuse me, bit of a cough going on there. When we go back to the current slide, I'm going to talk about a monitoring point 0. That terminology, or MPZ, been around a long time in Alps language, so many of you will be familiar with it, but we don't see all schools and colleges doing this when we visit. An MPZ is a grade point at the very start of year 13 that's essentially based on AS grades. For BTECs, obviously, it would have to be based on any units they'd completed, or perhaps teacher predictions, teacher most likely grades, but essentially it's if they get these same grades that they achieved at the end of year 12, what will the value added look like if nothing changes between now and next summer? And then, hey ho, bottom bullet point, then let's identify where we're going to improve, the strategies that will enable that to happen, and set to work from the very start of the year to enhance student outcomes, student achievement, and of course, our Alps reports. Now, I'm putting this up on screen, even though we're going to be looking at similar in Connect, because I think actually this is a very, very good way of looking at it. And all I've done, by the way, is export the AS subject results page from Connect and the MPZ subject results page from Connect and put them side by side. And you can see that the AS results are of great credit to the school. Lots of them are red hot, none of them are blue. But when we transfer those same AS results into the A-level benchmarks, removing, of course, anybody who's dropped the subject, and you can see, looking across, some subjects have lost more than others. The impact is that actually everything goes down at least a bit, and some subjects have gone down more than a bit. If you look in general, going down 2 Alps grades using the same AS grades applied to A level, or one grade in a few cases, take drama, is typical, 2 or 1. But you can see that if you're caught badly, take biology, 6 students have dropped, the 23 carrying on will be a grade 8, even though biology was red hot at AS. Now, this is another way of me going back to talking about MEGs and personalised targets and setting the sights on A level from the get up go. Now, I'm going to move from that and back into Connect now. So bear with me for a moment and we will get there. And I'm going to move to a second cut of Connect that I've set up in advance to save times. And this is called 21 Year 13 MPZ. So this is the Year 13 who are going to take their A levels in 2021, and it's their MPZ. And I'm going to go, first of all, actually to strategic analysis and start with an Alps template. And I'd be interested to know, actually, what will it look like overall based on these grades? And creating the report, I can see that I'm going to be an Alps grade 6 for the key indicators, perhaps certainly for the quality indicator, which in many ways we think is, the best single one, if you must have a single one, to actually choose to guide your analysis with. But you can see we drop into the blue in a couple of places as well. And frankly, this is not where we want to be at the end of 2021. I'm going to move away from the strategic area for the moment, however, and discard that, though you might, of course, want to save it. And I'm going to move into the subjects. Now, you can see here that many of the subjects, and it's the same information that we were looking at on the PowerPoint slide a minute ago, many subjects have dropped into the blue. I pointed out biology, so I'm going to nip into biology and have a little look. It's an 8 overall, 13 grades out of 23 need to be higher to be literally out into the black. And here's the students sorting again by prior attainment. And let's have a look at where they've ended up in AS. Well, we can see there's a bit of a problem at the top end. Now, of course, the A star grades, yet again, were not available to any of these students. So challenging some of those young people to get A star might well be a starting point. But look what's happened here. Look at all these grade Ds from students with MEGs that were A or B. Now, clearly, whatever has gone wrong that led their CAGs for AS to be set at D, a fresh start needs to be in place for these young people. They need to be reminded that their AS does not play any part this year in the A-level grade that will be awarded next summer, and they are going to be given the chance to show that this year they really can flourish. Look at those prior attainment scores that those young people got at GCSE. You'd clearly obviously turn on the what if, and again, this you'd never do it as randomly as this, but I mentioned challenging those young people to gain A stars. And frankly, I'm not having this as the teacher of this class. All of these young people are going to be challenged to at least aim to get a grade C. And if I did that, and I know this is not, it's not the way you would do it in school. It would be measured, it would be considered, it would be looking at each young person, but that shifts performance very safely into the middle of grade 6. Might still not be where that teacher wants to go. And of course, there may be other young people who I've not even looked at who might well be able to do much better. I'll look at one more subject as well, and I'm going to sort by entries and get the big entry subjects up the top. Not because these subjects have the biggest impact on your Alps report, though I will mention that they do, but clearly they have the biggest impact on the destinations of young people at 18. And as Maths, beyond the very successful at the moment Skills Challenge certificate, is performing not very well, I'll click into Maths, I'll move the thermometer. Maths need to find 7 to be a grade 6. They need to find 16 to be a grade 5. Well, let's just stop there for the moment. Let's go to students. Let's perform that prior attainment trick again, and let's bring all of the most able to the top. Well, I'm not going to count these, but there are, believe me, 18 grade A's achieved based on CAGs at AS, where the A star was not available. I would be immediately looking for those 7, or possibly many more than that from those 18. I'd also be paying some attention to the fact that 3 young people have come through to my set, or sets rather, in year 13 with grade E's, 4 of them, my apologies. And I am going to be also very, very careful with those young people to try to ensure that they do not fail by setting them aiming for a grade D at least. But finding those young people, I'm not going to do a what if again now, having done it once, but finding those young people is obviously a really good idea. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of other things now before we leave here. First of all, just in case you don't know, if you click Show All Teaching Sets, you can immediately see every subject's teaching sets, and where there's inconsistencies, for example, this Welsh back set, we saw Welsh back is actually performing or predicted to perform based on the grades at the moment to do very well. But this set, which actually has the most able cohort, is not predicted to do well at all. So there's the teaching set analysis, enabling you to deep dive quite quickly to wherever interests you. And there's also the ability to, oh, let's do this one actually. Let's look and see whether Welsh back is alone in having an issue with high ability students at the start of the year. We don't need the unknowns, so I'm going to get rid of those and apply that comparison. And to see it, I've got to say, show me all students in one table, as I'm doing there, and then bingo, here we are. Now, I'm going to sort in a moment, I think, by the Alps grades overall, and I can see there's the problem I've got in the Welsh back, but actually, coming down to the bottom here, I have the same problem in history, in, well, biology, they're all underachieving, chemistry, they're all underachieving, geography, they're all underachieving. So actually, I have seen that I've got a specific issue here, actually mainly with one set, and I've got 3 key subjects where I need to improve progress across the piece. But I can also see that I've got some subjects where actually it's the middle ability and lower ability students who have been struggling based on CAGs in comparison to their more able, as judged by GCSE, peers. So that's a useful one, I think. And obviously, I suspect you're all familiar with gender and ethnicity and EFSM, which is, I'm afraid, our disadvantaged name, covers pupil premium in England and EFSM in Wales and NI. So if you bear with that, obviously you can do those comparisons. We've made up one here for this made up school called C19 Home Learning, and I'd like to show you that one. You might not want those categories. You might want more than 3 categories, I don't know. But my colleague Ian, who put this data in, thought great, average and poor would do it for now, just to give you a sense of it. And if we apply that comparison and ask to see all the students in one table again, you can see whether this data makes an enormous amount of sense right here, right now. You can see subjects where there's differences, and as art craft is one of them, I'm going to nip into art craft and look at its thermometer. And you can see here we've got 4 thermometers for art craft. There's their overall grade, which is a 4. The students who had great engagement in lockdown, they're operating at a 3, and the average and the poor are operating at grade 4 and grade 5. And if I pull the overall thermometer to a grade 3, I'm looking for 3 students to improve by 1 grade to reach an Alps grade 3. So I'm going to nip to students again, and I'm now going to not sort by anything. I'm literally going to say, show me the average students and the poor students. And I'm going to be looking there for A, who do I now need to try to re-engage? Whatever problems they've had in lockdown, whether they couldn't access the online learning, whatever it was, what can I now do to re-engage these young people? But secondly, who actually can I now look at and think, if I'm successful, you can certainly do better than your grade in the final column. And I would be turning on what if, and for a second, I will literally suggest, for example, that young person, if I'm successful, I can challenge to get an A star, and obviously the rest is going to be fairly random because I don't know these young people. But I'm now, as you can see, I'm overall a 3, my average students are 3, my poor engagement students are up to a 4. So I think a system of this kind would be very useful in your monitoring in 2020-21. I'm now leaving Connect again. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. So bear with me for a second, and Bob's your uncle, and here we go. So, John, go back. My apologies. I want to show you one other thing. No, I'll do it in a moment. I'm going to talk for a minute about best practice in a consortia. Many of you do share students. We come across this when we visit schools in Wales a lot. You don't always, however, enable each other to track those students in Connect and enable, therefore, teachers to be able to see what their value added will be based on your role students and what their value added would be based on their taught at students if they're accepting young people into their class from your partners, or indeed to see what the value added will be for your students who have studied in the partner schools. And none of this is really, really difficult to do. It does depend on the 3 bullet points that I've put there. Clearly, sharing average GCSE scores and MEGs, and having probably a shared view of target setting in general, I think is probably number 1. You do need roughly similar recording dates because you do need to be analysing the data together. They don't need to be identical, but they need to be within, a couple of weeks, I would suggest. And you would need to agree what data was being recorded. There's no point one school, for example, recording working at grades and the other one predicted most likely grades. They're going to be different. And finally, your data manager needs to turn on Consortium School in Connect Data, and I'll show how to do that in a second, and would obviously also need to then, within Connect, identify young people based on the school at which they are on roll. And we'll show you all that in a second. I'm also referencing a rather long document called Best Practice in Connect Interactive for Schools Sharing Students, blah, blah, blah. It's even got a long name that we'll also be sharing with you. But for now, this slide, literally for your data manager, shows them where in Connect Data, which is where they do all of the uploading. This is in Connect Data Settings, in Consortium Settings. This is where they have that button ticked or moved on to enable Consortium headers in cohort workspaces to enable you to add role and taught at information for each student. And of course, again, any help needed with that, they should simply be in touch through the phone, probably with our customer support team for any additional guidance. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a second. I would now like to go and show you how this looks in Connect. So I'm resetting. We can do this with the MPZ data just as well as anything else. I'm going to go back to subjects, and there's my subjects, and it's what we've seen already before, but I'm going to edit it now and going to ask it to show me taught at. And you'll see that I'm working in partnership with 3 other schools, A, B, and C, as well as my school, EYG. I'm going to apply those comparisons and ask to see all students in one table. And this enables me, we haven't made this to be a very widespread sharing, but it enables me to see how the 2 students, my only 2, who are doing French in school A are getting on, and some interesting conversations need to be had there. How my only 3 doing music technology are getting on in school B, and there's some very congratulatory conversations to be had there, and how my 6 psychology students are doing in school C. Now, if we move away from that view by resetting, I'm also going to show you in quick groups enrolled at. It looks like I'm showing you the same, but as you'll see in a moment, it's going to be slightly the other way round, because here, this is showing my teachers, how they're getting on with their 12 in drama EYG students, and the 3 others that have joined that set from those 2 schools. And in music, how overall, it's 6 students and a grade 5, our own 4 are on a grade 6, and the 2 who've come from elsewhere are really floating the boat at the moment by exceptional performance. And sociology, you can see as well, a much more mixed picture. But I'm just going to say this, how much more useful is it for your teacher to be able to see this than not? And if I just click into sociology, you can see it visibly on the thermometer. If we go to students, you can see here's all the students. We've labeled some of them as guests, as you can see, come from elsewhere. And there's our EYG students. There's our school A, school B, and school C students, all laid out for you. And none of this, once the data manager has set it up, is hard work. And more schools across Wales are clamoring for the ability to do this. And we want to support you in this endeavour. So back, I think, now again to the PowerPoint. and I'm going to find where we were, which was best practice in a consortia, and I'm now going to move to supporting learner progress effectively in 2020-21. So from current slide, let's get going. I've already done the demonstration, and we're going to go to supporting learner progress effectively in 2020-21. Now, some of this I've probably already inadvertently said, and I'm not going to dwell too long on this right now, but we do think you have got obviously issues this year that we hope you never have in subsequent years. It's a real worry getting the school fully reopened without local lockdowns, as have happened in Caerphilly this week. You know, our hearts go out to all of you for everything you're trying to do, and not just post-16, but everything you're trying to do to help learners through these traumatic times. That's what our annual cycle usually looks like. And to an extent, you know, it's going to look like this again this year, I think, in a sense. You know, at the beginning, you've got subject reviews, maybe not so much of that this year as it's the most likely CAGs that were awarded. Target setting, monitoring point 0, what are our priorities, staff training, all of that, new staff who don't know Alps, all of that probably going on right here, right now. And clearly you will still have mock exams and in-year monitoring, etc., etc. But I think whilst the overall picture maybe looks the same, the individual picture in depth is probably going to look slightly different. And yesterday we did say, you know, you're the experts, and it'd be brilliant if you're willing to share any ideas you've got across your consortia. And I'd make a plea here that if you're watching this now for the first time, if you think we've got a really good idea for this academic year in terms of how we support students, when we assess them, how we assess them, etc., please do share with your regional consortia and other schools. It's how education works best, is it not, when we're all givers of ideas, we're all recipients of ideas, we're all learners, and we're all engaged in the same journey. Now, you can upload however many monitoring points to Connect as you might like, but we think it's important to consider not just this year, but the timing of assessment points that enable your teachers to have both covered the topics that are going to be assessed, that seems so blatantly obvious, but also, which maybe doesn't, but I think is also a crucial thing, the skills that need to be assessed. And we probably think that in lockdown, whether it was online learning or remote learning, you know, work sent home, and I know that happened literally, you delivered home in backs of cars and vans at times. We think you've probably been more likely to be successful in covering the topics than possibly the skills, the examination skills that need to be assessed. And therefore, we kind of think there's probably a lot of work needing to be done this year with year 13 in terms of ensuring that they are given sufficient chance to both learn the skills, practice the skills, and master those skills before they take their examinations. And you already probably know from your own experience, but mock exam grade points, when the mock exam grades are put into Connect, tend to be very blue. And I'll give you I'm going to do this in a minute for you. You'll see that in the school that the example school. So trying to time the mock exams to make sure that students can do at least well enough that it does not drain their confidence, drain your teacher's confidence in this crucial year is, I think, also probably very important. Here's a set of ideas for year 12. They're definitely not a straitjacket. They're possibly not even right for you at all. But we've tried to say, have a think whether this might be a good pattern. Now, we've already talked about September for MEGs and course suitability assessments. In October and November, lots of teaching, some mini assessments in class. The mock exams, December, maybe January, but the mock exams at some point mid-year. January and February, teaching and maybe in-class mini assessments, particularly geared to topics and skills that the young people did not appear to have mastered so well in the mocks. Maybe even, and many schools do this nowadays, maybe even another set of mocks in March. Finally, of course, assuming exams are when they typically are, in April, the final preparation for AS based on still learning gaps that seem to be needing to be addressed. Year 13, the MPZ we've already covered. In September and October, cracking on with teaching, maybe some in-class mini assessments, maybe in November a mock exam. Now that might seem early, but think about think about what you're going to do with the young people this year. Are they doing just the A2 units? Are they doing the A2 units and the AS units? Think about when would be best for you to actually have that first go at examining them and hopefully giving them confidence that A level is going to be something that they can cope with. Clearly, it couldn't be a past paper in November, and probably never should be at all in a mock, to be honest, based on, but not an off-the-shelf one. December to January, some teaching and in-class mini assessments, maybe another set of mocks in February, and then the final preparation for A level as well, and maybe for AS as well, if they're actually going to take those exams in any or all subjects. I'm sure many of you have got better ideas than this, and if we've been teaching, or if I've been teaching rather, granny to suck eggs in the last 5 minutes, my apologies. I'm going to move in a second to evaluating your results, and that's going to happen in Connect. And I just want to go back to, first of all, which I skipped over because I thought it was going to work better now, the data refresher, just in case there's anybody watching this who's not as confident as most of you on Alps basics. If you need more detail, of course, you can get in contact. There are 9 Alps grades. 1 to 3 are red hot. They put you in at least the top 25% of providers nationally across the UK. 7 to 9 are the blue grades that put you in the bottom 25%. If you're in the black, you're in the middle 50%. If you're a grade 5, you are essentially around nationally average. And a couple of numbers that are the only ones you really need to know to get an Alps thermometer in your subject or for the school. A score of 1.00 means on average the students have achieved the minimum expected grades, the MEGs. 0.2 in any direction is a whole grade per student at A and AS, slightly more complicated at BTEC, but similar. And therefore, if you score 0.8, which is 0.2 away from 1.00, on average, each student is a grade below their MEG, and 1.20 is, on average, each student is 1 grade above their MEG. So with the mantra that red is hot and blue is not, I'm again going to come out of the show and go back to Connect and spend some time for the remainder of this looking with you at Connect and how you might look at last summer's results and the monitoring that you did last year. And I'm going to begin with looking at examination results in comparison, as you can see here, to 3 previous years of examination results. Some of you may only have 2 years previously in. The odd school may only have 1 previous years in, but many of you have 4 and some of you have 5 or 6. But compare with what you can. Now, I'm going to go to strategic analysis first. I'm going to start with an Alps template. I'm going to start with A Level again. I'm going to select the report. I could put on a comparison, pardon me, a comparison group, but I'm not going to right now. And I'm going to create the report. And I'm sure many of you have done this many times, but it gives you all these tabs along here, enabling you to basically have a look at any of the pages that would be in your strategic review. And we're going to look at what happened this summer overall. And you can see that EYG has been a very successful Alps school for the past 4 years, including 2020. And that although they've done very well in 2020, the results are within the ballpark in terms of value added of what they've achieved previously. So I'm going to suggest, having actually done this for them, that EYG did try to standardize to make sure that if the standardization process had worked as we were told it was going to work, by subjects being perhaps pulled down if it looked like they were being too generous, they did try to, in many cases, but not all, put their subjects in line with the past. You'll see that better in a minute. I'm only going to take you to one page here, which is the banded by ability prior attainment multi-grade point summary. And I'm going to nip down to points per subject, points per entry. And I'm interested in this because actually I had a dip at the top in 2018, and it looked this year when we were awarding the CAGs that it was harder to find the A-star A grades for the most able cohort, and even in some cases the B grades for that cohort. We saw lots of really strong progress going on amongst this cohort, and it's interesting to see now that actually this is showing me that if my teachers were right, and I have no reason to think they were not, that perhaps from the very beginning of this year a focus on stretch and challenge and the most able would not be inappropriate. So moving away from the strategic zone, I'm just going to show you that you can print this. It prints it as an Alps report. You can save it. You can share it. And that these little icons appear very, very regularly across the Connect. We don't necessarily think they're quite big enough sometimes, but you know, these are all ways in which you can, having looked at this kind of data, share it with colleagues. I'm going to move away, however, back to home. I'm going to discard the report as it's just in a demo, and I'm going to move next to subject analysis. I'm not going to do much in subject analysis, but I do want to do a couple of things. Now, I'm going to sort by Alps grades here, and I'm bringing up a huge amount of subjects, and I'm suddenly realizing I need to put a filter on here because I've got Key Stage 4 results in here as well, and I don't want those. And actually it's going to be simpler just to have the A Level and BTEC results showing right now. My apologies for that little break, but you can see here lots of subjects that have performed very strongly this year. And you can see ones that were grade 4 this year. In a normal year, of course, you'd immediately, if you were the physics teacher, you'd be immediately clicking into physics, grade 4. You'd be immediately thinking, I need to now see how many grades needed to be higher. I needed 3 grades. You'd be looking at the what if and so forth. Clearly, not much of that, I think, is going to be going on based on results that were largely centre assessed grades. But of course, if they were, all you've got to do is nip to the students, turn on that what if, and look for the students that you think actually might have perhaps done better. But, you know, as I said, whilst lots of this is probably going to go on in year as you're progressing through the year, I can't see much of this happening right now, but worth just showing you that for a second. What I'm interested in the main here is actually finding out more about where did things go wrong in terms of the most able based on GCSE. So I'm going to apply that comparison again. And not panic while it's taking its while to cook, and maybe take the chance to have a little drink of water. And here we are. Once I click show all students in one table, I can now sort by the high ability students, and I can see where I had issues. Now, in some cases, I'm going to discount those issues, because if 2 or 1 student was the only person in the high cohort there, drawing any conclusions from that data would be, I'm going to say it, silly. But 25 young people in biology joining biology with high ability and not doing well is an issue, particularly as often the biology teacher has told me that actually it's the less able who are allowed to do biology that cause the problems in terms of value added. And I've got equally a problem in history, a very stark one actually, because history overall is red hot, but it's red hot based on phenomenal performance from those 8 students and underperformance from the most able. And I'm just going to nip into history to have a look at that. And you can see that on the thermometer, the mid-ability students performing out of their skins, the overall a grade 3, and actually the high ability students, well, they'd have been in the black if one of them had performed better. Let's nip into students and have a little look. And again, we don't need to look at all of them. There's the high ability students. You can see we can sort those by prior attainment as well, just those students. You can see here's a real problem, this young person who gained a C overall. And if we click on his or her name, it's a girl, and she got last year a C in history, A's in Welsh, Bac and French, and a B in chemistry. So I am going to take a hit on that and think I really maybe ought to have done better with that young person. So there's lots here that can be got at very, very easily and simply and very powerfully. And it's probably worth as well just doing one other comparison I didn't do earlier. Let's do gender actually, I think, in this occasion, and apply that comparison. I'll ask to see all the students in one table again, and I can sort by grade. I can see which subjects that the boys did really well in. I can see which subjects they didn't do so well in. English, Lang and Lit, but it's only 1 student. Government and politics, that's more of an issue for me.
and I can do the same by the young ladies and see their pattern. And of course, I can do exactly the same in terms of, oh, let's do it, got time, in terms of the EFSM students as well. It'll take a second to cook, and we'll quickly have a repeat of those exact manoeuvres, show all students in one table. There's how the non-disadvantaged have done, very small numbers. And actually, this school, EYG, main issue is really making sure as more EFSM students do well enough at GCSE to actually join the A-level classes. But you can see that actually there's some very good news for some of the disadvantaged students, some of the EFSM students. It's only in geography where those two youngsters, and that's not statistically significant, did poorly in comparison to their peers. So actually, apart from perhaps the lack of them, I'd be reasonably content, I think, with that, with seeing that. Also, I think just now, and I'm going to get into monitoring in a moment with you, I think I'll look at the student analysis here with you. I don't need that comparison on, so I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to point out actually that not all of you use tutor groups. And actually, if you do, let's just click on one and load it. It reduces the screen literally just to the 19 in that tutor group. It's possible again to then decide I'd like to see student performance groups and apply that comparison. This is obviously a year 12 tutor group doing AS. I can see who's above targets in all subjects, who's on or above targets in all subjects, who's below target in all subjects. And I know this was results data, but if this was monitoring data, I do think that the tutors having access to this enables them not just to be great pastoral leaders for those young people in their care, but it does enable them to have a greater interest in the progress young people are making, just to have interesting conversations, maybe not just with their tutees, but also if they see a pattern like this, possibly going to have not a go at, but a nice conversation with the AS chemistry teacher about the fact that 3 of my tutees don't seem to be getting it with you, and can I help in any way? What's their issues? Can I support in any way? And I think it does empower them in a very, very good way. I'm going to ask it to see all students again. And I'm now going to put on a filter to make sure that I'm only seeing, for now, year 13. Otherwise, it's going to be way too busy. And I'm going to put on that same filter again. It's already there. And see for the year group, 10 students who must be in line for the progress prizes when we have the, remotely or not, the celebration of students who have left us to move on to university. We're able to see who was below in everything. Black, of course, 1 grade below, blue, more than 1 grade below. Who was below in any subject? And obviously, that's only interesting really for the teacher who sees that they're below in a subject. Because you tend to feel if somebody's underachieved in everything, there was a collective failing, and maybe often such a awful individual issue with that young person in terms of mental health or family tragedy, that it wasn't really within the power of the subject teacher to deliver the MEG. But if it's one subject and everything else is going well, then I think you do tend to feel I need to take responsibility for that one. I'm going to move away from the exam results for the last 15 minutes to a set of data that I've put together based on the previous year's monitoring. And it starts with the, it doesn't actually, I need to just quickly change that one. I need to select year 13, no bad thing to be showing you this. I need to select monitoring and I need to pick the 20 year 13 MPZ. I've got the September 20 MPZ. I've got the mock exams they took just before Christmas. I've got the monitoring point 2 data that went home at the start of February, about a month before lockdown, and was predicted grades. And I've got, finally, not their results, but almost identical, their centre assessed grades that we put together and then became their results, apart from the odd one or two that were boosted through the mutant algorithm. So I'm going to press OK here now. And I'm going to go here, first of all, to an area we haven't looked at, which is monitoring accuracy. Monitoring accuracy works in a variety of ways. We're on trends difference here, and this compares the 2 grade points, the one that is, let's do it, the main grade point, and comparison 1. And you can sort by Alps score difference, and that brings up, first of all, at the top, the subjects, and you might think this odd, but the subjects that actually submitted as CAGs grades that were not as strong as the grades that went home in February. Now, I'm making this up, of course, but I'm going to say these are the ones where, based on prior history, the school decided to be more modest in what they submitted in terms of CAGs. And I know that did go on. I'm going to sort it the other way. And there's subjects that have submitted much higher grades. I'm now going to shift sideways to the percentage student grade difference, and I'm going to sort by that. And here's a few that are interesting in that it looks like the identical grades that were sent home in February were then submitted as CAGs in those 4 subjects. Sorting the other way, the biggest change was 50% of the grades were different in psychology. Now, if you remember, 0.2 is a whole grade per student, 0.1 would be half of them, 0.5 is a quarter of them, not 50%. So some of the grades, some students must have either moved by more than 1 grade perhaps, or some maybe went down. We're going to go in a moment and have a look at that. But first of all, I want to nip you to trends variance, which brings up all 4 areas to look at. So here we've got the 4 selected grade points. We've now got a column that says largest difference. I can sort by that, of course. Here, it's pretty meaningless because there's only 3 students, but the largest difference is actually between the MPZ and the mocks. And actually, many of the larger differences are pivoting on the mocks, and the mocks being less successful. I'm going to now click into psychology. You can see there's a trend line going on there, but I want to dig a bit deeper. And there's the psychology trend line. That's the MPZ, that's the mocks, that's MP2, and there's the 3 that the CAGs or the final results eventually achieved. I can overlay the teaching sets, and you can see a very steep curve in 13B set and a more modest leap in 13D set. I'm going to move to the subject page, and this is showing me, here's the CAGs, here's the MPZ, my apologies, very blue. Here's the mocks. They've done better in the mocks than based on my end of year 12 assessment in 2019, the EAS grades. That's led to slightly higher predictions in MP2 in February, beginning of February, and here's the CAGs. I want to look at some trends here. Now, this area was invented during lockdown, and one of the reasons for it was to enable people to use it to actually establish the CAGs, the most likely grades. And you can see for each student a trend line. You can see for each student their grades from each grade point. You can sort by grade difference to see, and I was right, some students actually were submitted a lower CAG. If you're wondering what's going on here, by the way, this made-up school uses fine grades for predicted grades, and the minus means I'm not so sure about the D, might slip to an E. The minus again meaning the same. The equals, now that's a bit odd because the equals means I think they're secure on that grade, and any plus that you see means with a fair wind behind them on a good day could maybe get the A star. I'm going to sort by grade difference the other way, and you can see those that went up a grade. And I'm also going to show you that it's as easy as this to switch grade points. So I'm going to choose MPZ, and this is now comparing how they started the year based on their AS grade with the A level grade that they got awarded through the CAGs. And you can see 4 students who actually went up 3 grades during the year. Now, if you click on one, you can get their trends in all subjects. And actually, when we bring up student 138, this girl's E was aberrant, because actually moving forward, the grades she finally achieved, which were her results, of course, A, B, B, the B in psychology was very much in line with her performance in the other subjects. And I'll go back and show another, perhaps, doesn't really matter which one. Let's pick another that went up 3 grades. Here again, you can see that actually both biology and psychology, the student made gains in those subjects, gained 2 A's, 2 B's. Now, why am I showing you all this? It's not really anything to do with these 2 students. It's literally to say, isn't this a thing of beauty that you can, as easily as this, move from showing the grade difference against any of the previous grade points. Didn't do the mocks, but won't hurt to just quickly flick to that. And to do it like that, so simply, and then to move to any student and see their trend over a year as it builds. How powerful for you is that? I think I will go back really, really briefly to psychology and point out that actually most of the gains in psychology were in that one set. We saw that when we looked at the trend lines, but you can dive from having seen that deeply into the set and start to look at the students and sort by prior attainment, etc. Let's do that. Sort by prior attainment and see who made the gains, where they came from, etc., etc. So I think the trend line does it better, but so that you've got all of the tools at your disposal. I think that's important to show. And moving back, I think for now that will nearly do. I'm therefore going to nip back to the PowerPoint. As we finish, I'm going to move to the very end. This is what we've just been doing. And I hope that's been really useful. I hope this has made up, to be honest, to yesterday. We still don't know, because this is just the next morning, exactly why Connect kept crashing. And we're so sorry that that was your experience in yesterday's webinar, to the 90 odd of you who gave up your time and certainly didn't have the best of experiences in CI. Couple of points. All schools in the CSC region also use Alps 11 to 16. Now, I'm not saying you should or you should not, but because of that, we do have an £800 plus VAT offer for any other school in Wales that would like to have, basically a 2020 Key Stage 4 report, the ability to use Key Stage 4 in Connect throughout this academic year, and a strategic review meeting, and it'd have to be via video conference, but one where we would go through with you exactly how to use it and what your 2020 results were showing, etc. And there's details there of how to get the more information if that interests you. If you are in CSC, my apologies, I am begging you at this point to go back to school and make sure that somebody has booked in to at least one of these training sessions. The first one is actually on Thursday, the 10th of September, which is tomorrow as I'm saying this, but may have gone by the time that you receive this. We put them down as regional sessions for the 5 LAs, but actually, because many schools have been saying the date that it says Cardiff or the date it says Vale doesn't suit me, we're now saying to any CSC school, book into whichever of these suits you best. So again, little job for you back at the ranch, please. And finally, that's all for me. I think I've hope this has made up for yesterday. We love working with you in Wales. We certainly will be putting on more events, both virtually and hopefully, given time, given perhaps some better news in terms of the virus, hopefully at some point be able to come back and visit and put on conferences and come to your schools as we love doing. And finally, if anybody is interested in a video conference going through your data, that could be whatever data you want, your results data, your in-year data, your MPZ, it can be anything, whatever you would like, then give us a ring or drop us an email and we will sort that out for you. I hope this has been good for you today, and thank you very much for joining us.